When a frozen widow knocked on a stranger's door in the dead of Nebraska winter, she expected charity. What she got was a proposal that would change three broken lives forever. This is a story of survival, second chances, and a love letter from beyond the grave that gave permission to heal. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys. Drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. Now let's begin Clara's story. I need a wife, not a servant. Frozen widow's desperate knock led to unexpected love. I don't need hired help. I need a wife. The words hung in the warm kitchen air like ice crystals, impossible and sharp. Clara Whitmore stared at the man who'd just spoken them, her frost-numbed fingers still wrapped around the tin cup of coffee he'd given her mind struggling to make sense of what she just heard. She'd knocked on this door 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago, she'd been prepared to beg, to grovel, to offer any labor, no matter how degrading, just for the chance to survive the night. The Nebraska prairie wind had whispered death in her ear for 3 days straight, and she'd walked through that whisper with nothing but stubborn will keeping her upright. And now this stranger, this hard-faced man with eyes like winter shadows, was proposing marriage. I don't understand, Clara managed, her voice still raw from the cold. Jake Mercer leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed over his broad chest. He was tall, probably mid-30s, with the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. Dark hair, darker eyes, jaw set in a permanent line of resignation. The kind of man who'd been carved from the same unforgiving stone as the Nebraska landscape. It's simple enough, he said, his tone as flat as the prairie outside. I'm a widower with a 5-year-old son and a failing ranch. I need someone to run the household, help with the work, and be a mother to my boy. You need shelter and food. We can make an arrangement. An arrangement? Clara's laugh came out bitter. You mean marriage? Legal and binding. You'd have a roof, meals, safety. In return, you'd keep the house, help with ranch work, and care for Caleb. He paused, something flickering across his face, too quick to read. My son, he's 5. His mother died giving birth to him. Clara set down the coffee cup carefully, her hands still shaking. She thought of Daniel, her sweet, optimistic Daniel, who'd believed hard work and faith would see them through, who'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to save their farm, and died of pneumonia in his sleep, leaving her with debts she couldn't pay and a future she couldn't imagine. She thought of the bank officer who'd taken her farm with papers and politeness and zero compassion. She thought of the 3 days she just survived walking through cold that wanted to kill her, taking what rides she could from strangers, her money running out near a crossroads where a wagon driver had pointed vaguely west and said, there's ranches that way, maybe 20 miles. 20 miles. She'd made it maybe 15 before she couldn't walk anymore, before this house had appeared like a miracle through the blowing snow. Why me? Clara asked. You don't know anything about me. I could be a terrible cook, a poor housekeeper. Could be, Jake agreed, but you walked through a blizzard rather than give up. That tells me you've got spine. That's worth more than perfect biscuits. What about your son? What if he doesn't accept me? For the first time, Jake's composure cracked. Pain flashed across his face, quickly suppressed. Caleb doesn't talk, hasn't said a word since his mother died. Doctor says there's nothing wrong with him physically, that it's grief that he'll speak when he's ready. He looked away, staring at something Clara couldn't see. Been over a year. I'm starting to think he's forgotten how. The grief in his voice was real raw, despite his attempts to hide it. Clara recognized it because she carried the same weight, different circumstances, but the same ache. Before she could respond, small footsteps sounded on the stairs. A little boy appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was small for 5, with his father's dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for his face. He wore a nightshirt and carried a slate and chalk, pausing when he saw Clara. Caleb, Jake said, his voice gentler than Clara had heard it. This is Miss Clara Whitmore. She's going to be staying with us. The boy's hand paused on the chalk, but he didn't look up. He moved to the table, pulling out a chair and sitting down, already drawing on his slate. Careful, precise lines forming a horse's legs, its mane. Clara moved slowly, pulling out the chair across from him and sitting down. She didn't try to touch him or demand his attention. Instead, she watched him draw. That's beautiful, she said quietly. You're very talented. Caleb's eyes flicked to her just for a second. She saw wariness there and loneliness in something that might have been hope buried deep. I'm not very good at drawing, Clara continued, keeping her voice soft, but I'm good at listening, and I'm good at keeping promises. She paused. Your father asked me to help take care of this house and you. I said I'd think about it. But I want you to know if I stay, I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just trying to help, if that's all right with you. Caleb's hands started moving again, adding detail to the horse's face. He didn't speak, but he didn't leave either. In the silence, Clara took that as permission. Jake watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. The spare room was small but clean with a narrow bed and a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. Clara set down her bundle, everything she owned wrapped in a threadbare shawl, and removed her boots and coat. She should have fallen asleep immediately. She was exhausted, frozen, drained. Instead, she lay awake listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere down the hall, floorboards creaked. A door opened and closed softly, Jake checking on his son perhaps. The wind continued its whispered threats outside, but the walls held firm. Clara thought about Jake Mercer's offer. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't even particularly kind. It was practical, transactional, a bargain struck between two people with nothing left to lose. But it was real, and real was all she had left. She thought about the woman Jake had loved, who'd given her life to bring Caleb into the world. What had she been like? Had she loved this harsh, blunt man? Had she softened him, made him smile? And the boy, 5 years old and silent, grieving in a way his father couldn't fix. Clara pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heartbeat. Still alive, still fighting. The question wasn't whether Jake Mercer's offer was ideal. The question was whether she had the strength to walk away from it. By the time dawn light crept through the window, she had her answer. No. She found Jake in his barn, mucking out stalls. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral, but his hands stilled on the pitchfork. I'll stay, Clara said. No preamble, no uncertainty. Jake studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Terms. Equal partnership. I'm not a servant or a housekeeper you're providing for. I work. You work. We both contribute. Agreed. I need to meet Caleb properly before we formalize anything. If he's frightened of me or doesn't want me here, we wait. His comfort matters more than our convenience. Something shifted in Jake's eyes. Approval, perhaps. Fair. And if this arrangement isn't working for either of us, we discuss it honestly. No resentment, no martyrdom. You planning on it not working? I'm planning for honesty. Jake set down the pitchfork. Anything else? Clara hesitated, then pushed forward. Respect. I won't be spoken to like I'm simple or incapable, and I expect the same courtesy I'll give you. Wasn't planning on being a bastard to my own wife. Good, then we understand each other. Jake extended his hand. We'll go into town tomorrow. Get the marriage license, find the judge, make it legal. Clara took his hand. His grip was calloused, firm, warm. They shook once, sealing a bargain neither of them fully understood yet. Now, Jake said, releasing her hand, let's introduce you to Caleb properly. The boy was in the kitchen again, sitting at the table with his slate and chalk. He looked up briefly when Clara and Jake entered, then back down at his slate. He was drawing another horse. Jake pulled out a chair and sat down. Caleb, Miss Clara, has agreed to stay with us. She's going to be part of our family now. Caleb's hand paused on the chalk. Clara sat down across from him, moving slowly. I know this is strange, she said gently. Having someone new here, but I want you to know something important. I'm not here to take anyone's place. Your mama will always be your mama. I'm just someone who wants to help take care of you and your papa, if you'll let me. Caleb looked at her, then really looked. His dark eyes searched her face, and Clara held his gaze steadily, letting him see whatever he needed to see. Finally, Caleb picked up his slate and turned it around to show her. The horse he'd drawn was standing in a field, and now there were 3 figures beside it, a tall man, a woman, and a small child. Is that us? Clara asked softly. Caleb nodded. It's beautiful. You have a wonderful gift. The corners of Caleb's mouth lifted just slightly, not quite a smile, but close. He turned the slate back around and kept drawing. Jake stood. I'll make breakfast. Caleb likes pancakes. Then pancakes it is, Clara said. As she worked alongside Jake in the kitchen, measuring flour, heating the griddle, she felt Caleb watching her. Small glances, quick assessments. She didn't push, didn't try to force conversation. She just cooked, humming softly under her breath. An old melody her mother had sung, something about rivers and homecoming. When she set the plate in front of Caleb, she'd shaped the pancakes like horses, carefully formed the way she'd seen him draw them. Caleb's eyes widened. He looked up at her, really looked this time, and something in his expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but recognition perhaps. An acknowledgement that she'd seen what mattered to him and honored it. Jake sat down at the table accepting his own plate without comment. They ate in silence, the three of them, as the winter sun climbed higher and the wind finally began to ease. Clara didn't know if this would work. Didn't know if she'd made the right choice or a desperate mistake. But as she watched Caleb carefully cut his pancake horse into pieces, saving the head for last, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Possibility. The town was called Salvation, which Clara found either deeply ironic or perfectly appropriate. They made the trip in Jake's wagon, the three of them bundled against the cold. Caleb sat between them, his small body a silent presence. He'd brought his slate and chalk drawing continuously, horses mostly, but also birds, trees, the outline of the ranch house. Jake drove in silence, his attention on the road. Clara watched the landscape roll past, endless white interrupted by fence posts and the occasional farmhouse smoke rising from chimneys and thin gray threads. This was hard country, demanding country. It took everything and gave back only what you could wrest from it through sheer stubbornness. She understood why Jake had made his offer. A man alone with a grieving child, a failing ranch, and a harsh climate couldn't afford sentiment. He needed practical help, not romantic entanglement. The question was whether Clara could provide what he needed without losing herself in the process. Town's small, Jake said, suddenly breaking the silence. Maybe 300 people. General store, church, saloon, livery. Judge Harrison handles legal matters. He's fair if gruff. Will people talk? They'll talk regardless. Jake glanced at her. Let them. Our business is our own. Salvation appeared over a rise, a cluster of buildings huddled together as if for warmth. Main Street ran straight through the center, flanked by false front structures that had seen better days. A few people moved between buildings, bundled against the cold. Jake pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a building marked County Office. He set the brake, then looked down at Caleb. Need you to wait here, son. Won't be long. Caleb nodded, his chalk already moving across the slate. Inside the office was warm and cluttered. A pot-bellied stove radiated heat and papers covered every available surface. A man in his 60s looked up from a desk, wire-rimmed spectacles sliding down his nose. Jake Mercer, he said, his voice carrying the rough affection of long acquaintance. Don't often see you in town midwinter. Need a marriage license, Judge? Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose. His gaze shifted to Clara, assessing. That's so? This is Clara Whitmore, Jake said. We're here to make it legal. The judge stood, moving around the desk with surprising agility for a man his age. He extended his hand to Clara. Pleasure, Mrs. Whitmore. Miss Whitmore, Clara corrected, shaking his hand, for a few more minutes at least. Judge Harrison's eyes sharpened. You sure about this, Miss? Jake's a good man, but he's had hard years. The ranch isn't what it was, and there's the boy to consider. I'm aware, Clara said firmly. And yes, I'm sure. The judge looked between them, then shrugged. Your lives, your choices. He shuffled through papers, producing the necessary forms. Fill these out. I'll get my Bible. The process was surprisingly quick. Forms signed, vows spoken in a cramped office that smelled of paper and wood smoke. Judge Harrison's wife appeared from somewhere to serve as witness, her expression curious but kind. She squeezed Clara's hand afterward, whispering, Welcome to Salvation, dear. And just like that, Clara Whitmore became Clara Mercer. They stopped at the general store on the way back. Jake purchased supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, a few other essentials. The store owner, a woman named Abigail Porter, studied Clara with barely concealed interest. Heard you got married, Jake, Mrs. Porter said, her tone carefully neutral. Congratulations. Thank you. Jake's response was equally neutral. Mrs. Porter's gaze settled on Clara. You'll be taking care of the Mercer Ranch then. I will. Good luck with it. That place needs a firm hand. The words could have been kindly meant, but Clara heard the skepticism underneath. She met Mrs. Porter's eyes steadily. I appreciate the well wishes. Back in the wagon, Caleb showed Clara his latest drawing. The three of them in the wagon rendered in simple lines, but somehow capturing something essential. Jake driving Clara beside him, Caleb between them. A family or the outline of one. So, the days fell into a rhythm. Clara woke before dawn to start the stove, make coffee, prepare breakfast. Jake worked the ranch feeding animals, repairing fences, cutting firewood. Caleb followed his father, went aloud or stayed in the kitchen with Clara drawing on his slate. She learned the contours of the house, its creaks and quirks. The bedroom she'd been given was across the hall from Jake's room next to Caleb's small chamber. Separate spaces, separate lives joined by proximity and necessity. Jake wasn't cruel, but he wasn't warm either. He spoke when necessary, thanked her for meals, and kept his distance. At night, Clara heard him moving in his room, pacing sometimes, unable to sleep. She understood. Her own sleep was fitful, interrupted by dreams of Daniel, of the farm, of all the life she'd left behind. But there was work, and work was salvation. She cleaned the house room by room, scrubbing years of accumulated grief from the corners. She mended clothes, organized the pantry, made plans for spring planting. One afternoon, she found a trunk in the attic containing a woman's belongings. Dresses, letters, a silver hairbrush. Elizabeth's things. She brought it to Jake, who was in the barn repairing a saddle. Eliza's things, he said, his voice tight. Meant to sort through them. Never did. Would you like me to pack them away properly? Clara hesitated. Or, if you'd rather keep them out. Pack them, Jake interrupted. Caleb might want them someday when he's older, but keeping them scattered around like shrines isn't helping anyone. Clara nodded. She spent an afternoon carefully folding dresses, wrapping the hairbrush in soft cloth, organizing letters by date. She found a photograph, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile holding an infant. Caleb. This she framed and placed in Caleb's room where he could see his mother's face. That night, she heard Caleb crying softly. She stood outside his door, uncertain, then knocked gently. Caleb, may I come in? Silence. Then the sound of small feet, the door opening a crack. She entered slowly. Caleb was in his nightshirt, his face tear-streaked. He pointed to the photograph. Your mama, Clara said softly. She was beautiful. Caleb nodded, more tears spilling over. Clara sat on the edge of his bed. I lost someone too, my husband. His name was Daniel. She pulled out the small locket she wore, showing Caleb the tiny portrait inside. He died, and I miss him every morning. Some days more than others. Caleb studied the locket, then looked up at her with those two old eyes. Missing someone doesn't mean forgetting them, Clara continued. And having new people in your life doesn't replace the ones you lost. There's room for both. Your heart's bigger than you think. She didn't expect a response, but Caleb climbed into her lap, his small body trembling. Clara held him, rocking slightly, humming that old melody about rivers and homecoming. When she finally tucked him back into bed, he was asleep. She turned to leave and found Jake in the doorway watching. How long he'd been there, she didn't know. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I did. He nodded slowly. Thank you. It was the first time she'd heard genuine warmth in his voice. 2 weeks after the wedding, a rider appeared on the road to the ranch. A woman on a gray mare, her posture ramrod straight, her expression stern. Clara watched from the kitchen window as Jake greeted her in the yard. Their conversation was too quiet to hear, but the tension was visible even from a distance. When they entered the house, the woman's gaze swept over everything, the clean kitchen, the organized shelves, Clara standing by the stove with the efficiency of a general inspecting troops. So you're the wife, the woman said. Not a question. Clara Mercer, Clara replied evenly. Pleased to meet you. Are you? The woman removed her gloves with deliberate precision. I'm Ruth Blackwell, Jake's sister. I'd like to speak with you, Jake. Privately. Anything you need to say, you can say in front of my wife. Jake said, his voice carrying a warning. Ruth's expression hardened. Fine. What in God's name were you thinking, marrying a stranger? A woman who appeared out of nowhere with no references, no family, no... Ruth, Jake's voice went cold. Don't. Don't what? Don't care that my brother married someone we know nothing about, that Sarah's barely been gone a year. Sarah's been dead a year, Jake corrected, his tone icy. And I've been drowning, trying to keep this place running and raise Caleb alone. Clara's helping. That's all you need to know. Is it? Ruth's gaze swung back to Clara. What exactly do you get out of this arrangement? A roof over your head, a man to take care of you. Clara met her eyes without flinching. I get partnership same as he does. I work for my place here. How is that shameful? How convenient for you. That's enough, Jake said. Is it? Ruth's voice rose. You bring a stranger into this house around Caleb, and I'm supposed to just accept it. What do you know about her, where she came from, what she's running from? I'm running from exactly what you think, Clara said quietly. Poverty, loneliness, a world that didn't have space for a widow with no means. Yes, I needed help. But your brother needed help too. We made a bargain. I don't see how that's shameful. Ruth opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Where's Caleb? She asked finally. Upstairs, Jake said. In his room. Ruth moved past them both, her boots loud on the stairs. Jake let out a long breath, running his hand through his hair. I'm sorry. Don't be. She loves Sarah and she loves Caleb. That's not wrong. No, but neither are you. They stood in the kitchen, the silence heavy between them. Upstairs, they could hear Ruth's voice, gentle now, talking to Caleb. She won't be the only one with questions, Clara said. Town's going to talk. People are going to assume things. Let them. Even if they assume I trapped you, seduced you, Jake's laugh was short, bitter. Anyone who knows me knows that's impossible. I don't seduce. Don't get seduced either. He met her eyes. We know the truth, that's what matters. Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd learned that truth was often less powerful than rumor, especially in small communities where gossip was currency and judgment came easy. When Ruth came back downstairs, her expression was troubled. She looked at Clara for a long moment. Caleb showed me his drawings, she said finally. Horses the ranch. The three of you together, she paused. He seems content, more settled than I've seen him in months. Clara said nothing, waiting. I still think you moved too fast, Ruth continued, her tone careful now. But if you're genuine, if you truly mean to care for him, not just use this situation for your own benefit, then I'll give you a chance, her gaze hardened. But if you hurt my nephew, if you damage him in any way, you'll answer to me. Understood. Ruth nodded once, then turned to Jake. I'll be back in 2 weeks to check on things. Looking forward to it, Jake said dryly. After Ruth left, the house felt quieter, heavier. Clara went back to preparing dinner, her hands steady even though her mind was churning. She understood Ruth's this protectiveness, even respected it. But it was a reminder of how fragile this arrangement was, how easily it could collapse under scrutiny and doubt. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Jake knocked on her door. Come in. He entered, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Wanted to say today with Ruth, you handled that well. She has every right to be suspicious. Maybe, but you didn't back down. Didn't apologize for being here. He paused. That matters. Clara set down the book she'd been pretending to read. Jake, are we making a mistake? Probably. His honesty was almost funny. But it's the best mistake available to us. And from where I'm standing, it's working better than I expected. Is it? House is running. Caleb's calmer. You're managing things I couldn't. He met her eyes. That's not nothing. But it's not love either. No, Jake agreed, but maybe it doesn't need to be. Maybe partnership is enough. After he left, Clara lay in the darkness listening to the house settle around her. Partnership. It was a practical word, an honest word, but it left no room for the small, traitorous hope growing in her chest, the hope that maybe someday this cold arrangement might thaw into something warmer. She pushed the thought away. Hope was dangerous. Better to focus on what she could control, the work, the routine, the slow process of building stability from nothing. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, but inside the house was warm. And for now, that was enough. Spring came late to the Nebraska prairie, arriving in reluctant increments, rather than grand pronouncements. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and mud beneath. Ice retreated from the creek bed, and the wind, though still cold, carried hints of something softer underneath. Clara marked the change not by the calendar, but by Caleb's drawings. The horses on his slate began appearing in fields of grass rather than snow. Trees sprouted leaves. Birds appeared in careful strokes across the sky. He still didn't speak, but he'd started following her around the house, his small shadow appearing whenever she worked. When she needed bread, he pulled up a stool to watch. When she mended clothes, he sat nearby with his slate. When she hung laundry on the line the first time the weather permitted it, He handed her clothespins one by one, his small hands careful and deliberate. Jake noticed. She caught him watching them, sometimes his expression unreadable. But he said nothing, just returned to his work, the endless cycle of repairs and maintenance that kept the ranch from falling apart completely. The rhythm they'd established held. Separate but parallel lives intersecting at meals and in the care of Caleb, then diverging again into their respective tasks. It was functional, sustainable. Nothing more. Until the morning Caleb appeared in the kitchen before dawn while Clara was starting the stove. He tugged at her sleeve, urgent, his eyes wide. "What is it?" Clara asked, crouching to his level. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the door. She followed, confused, snatching up a shawl against the early cold. He led her outside across the yard to the barn. And inside, in the corner of an empty stall, a half-wild tabby cat that usually avoided humans lay on a nest of straw with 4 tiny kittens still damp and mewing. Caleb looked up at Clara, his face luminous with wonder. "Oh," she breathed, "aren't they beautiful?" He nodded vigorously, then pointed to himself, then to the kittens. His meaning was clear. Could he keep them? Could they be his? "We'll have to ask your father," Clara said carefully, "but I imagine the mama cat will want to stay in the barn. We can visit them, though. Make sure they're safe and warm." Caleb's face fell slightly, but he nodded. Together they crept closer, watching as the mother cat cleaned her babies with single-minded devotion. The kittens were impossibly small, blind and helpless, entirely dependent on their mother's care. When Jake came in for breakfast an hour later, Caleb was practically vibrating with the need to share his discovery. He grabbed his father's hand and dragged him toward the barn before Jake had even removed his coat. Clara watched through the window as father and son stood in the barn doorway, Caleb pointing, Jake crouching down to look. She saw Jake's expression soften in a way she'd never witnessed before, saw him ruffle Caleb's hair, saw the boy lean against his father's side. When they returned to the house, Jake was carrying Caleb on his shoulders, the child's rare smile bright as morning sun. "Apparently we have kittens," Jake said, settling Caleb back on the floor. "Apparently we do. He wants to name them. I told him he could once their eyes open, and we can tell which is which." Caleb pulled out his slate, already sketching. 4 small shapes huddled together. That night at dinner, the silence felt different, lighter somehow. Caleb kept looking between Clara and Jake, his expression animated in a way it rarely was. When Clara cleared the dishes, Caleb helped without being asked, carefully carrying his own plate to the wash basin. "He's happy," Jake said later, after Caleb was in bed. He stood in the kitchen doorway, still in his work clothes, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "Haven't seen him like this since before Eliza died." "Children need small joys," Clara said, "things that's theirs to care about. He has you." The words came out quiet, almost reluctant. "That's made the difference." Clara's hand stilled in the dishwater. "I'm just here doing what's needed." "It's more than that." Jake moved into the room closer than he usually came. "You see him, really see him, not just as my child or a problem to solve. You see who he is. He's easy to see. He's a beautiful child. Eliza used to say that." Jake's voice went rough. "That he was beautiful, that he'd do great things." He paused. "I'm glad you're here, Clara. Glad you knocked on my door that night." It was the closest he'd come to expressing anything personal since their wedding. Clara turned from the dishes, wiping her hands on her apron, meeting his eyes. "So am I." They stood in the quiet kitchen, the space between them charged with something Clara couldn't name. Not desire exactly, but recognition perhaps. 2 people seeing each other clearly for the first time. Then Jake cleared his throat, stepping back. "Should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow." "Good night, Jake." "Good night." But sleep was a long time coming that night for both of them. The next week brought new challenges. The plow broke, requiring a full day's work to repair. One of the horses went lame, limiting what work Jake could accomplish. And the supplies they'd purchased in town ran lower than expected, forcing difficult choices about what to prioritize. Clara stretched every ingredient, made bread from the last of the flour, watered down the coffee. She didn't complain, but she saw the worry in Jake's eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he looked at the near-empty pantry. "I can go to town," she offered one morning. "See about credit at the general store until we sell some livestock. Mrs. Porter doesn't give credit. Not to me, anyway." Jake's voice was flat. "Not since—" He stopped himself. "Since the ranch started failing. She's a businesswoman. Can't blame her for protecting her interests. Clara thought about the woman in the store, her barely concealed skepticism. There must be another option. There is. Jake's voice remained flat. I can sell the back 40. Land's not much use anyway, too rocky for decent grazing. Man in town's been asking about it. And if you sell it, we eat this month, maybe next month too, if we're careful. And after that, Jake didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the math. A failing ranch plus dwindling resources equaled an inevitable conclusion. That afternoon, while Jake was working on the fence line, Clara walked to the back of the property. The 40 acres in question were indeed rocky, spotted with scrub brush and little grass, but they bordered the creek and water was precious in this country. She stood there a long time thinking. Then she walked to the barn, found Caleb with his kittens, and crouched beside him. I need to go to town tomorrow, she said. Would you like to come with me? Caleb looked up from the kitten he was gently stroking, his eyebrows raised in question. I have an idea, Clara said, but I need your help to make it work. The next morning before Jake was awake, Clara hitched the wagon herself. Caleb climbed up beside her, and together they drove toward salvation. In the back of the wagon was everything of value Clara still owned from her previous life, a silver serving set that had been her grandmother's, a cameo brooch, 2 decent dresses she no longer needed. Where are you going? Jake called from the porch, having emerged at the sound of the wagon. Town, Clara called back. We'll be home by evening. She didn't give him time to argue, just snapped the reins and set the horses moving. The pawnshop in Salvation was a cramped space that smelled of tobacco and old leather. The proprietor, a thin man with calculating eyes, examined Clara's items with professional disinterest. $30 for the lot, he said finally. They're worth twice that. Then sell them somewhere else. He pushed the items back across the counter. Clara gathered them up, her mind racing. $30 would barely cover a week of supplies. She needed more. She tried the general store next. Mrs. Porter was behind the counter, her expression cooling when she saw Clara. Mrs. Mercer, what brings you to town? I have a proposition. Clara set her items on the counter. I need credit for supplies. I can offer these as collateral plus my labor. Your labor, I can sew, mend, alter, create new pieces. I saw your ready-made dresses in the back. They could use finishing work. And I noticed your ledgers look disorganized. I kept books for my husband's farm. I could help with that too. Mrs. Porter's expression didn't change. And why would I need your help when I've managed just fine on my own? Because you're doing the work of 3 people, Clara said quietly. And because Jake Mercer is too proud to ask for help, but his wife isn't. We need supplies to get through to summer. I'm willing to work for them. You're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to be a good businesswoman. My labor in exchange for goods. No charity, just trade. Mrs. Porter was quiet for a long moment, studying Clara with new interest. Finally, she nodded toward the back room. Can you finish a hem on a dress in less than an hour? I can finish it in 30 minutes. Show me. Clara did. While Caleb sat quietly with his slate, she worked with quick, precise stitches, finishing the hem with professional efficiency. Mrs. Porter watched, her expression gradually shifting from skepticism to approval. You're good, she admitted when Clara finished. Better than the girl I had helping last year. Then we have a deal. Mrs. Porter hesitated, then extended her hand. 1 month of supplies in exchange for 20 hours of work. And if Jake asks you, tell him I'm doing this because I need the help, not out of pity. Done. They shook on it, and Clara felt something loosen in her chest. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a bridge. Time to find another answer. On the way home with the wagon loaded with supplies, Caleb tugged at her sleeve. When she looked at him, he pointed to himself, then to her, then made a heart shape with his small hands. Clara's throat tightened. I love you too, she said softly. Caleb smiled, a rare, brilliant thing, and settled against her side for the rest of the ride home. Jake was waiting in the yard when they returned, his expression stormy. Where were you? Getting supplies. Clara set the brake, climbing down. What supplies? We don't have. I secured work to pay for them. She turned to help Caleb down from the wagon. At the general store, sewing, bookkeeping, 20 hours this month. Jake's jaw tightened. I don't want you working in town. Why not? Because people will talk, say I can't provide for my own family. People already talk, Jake. Let them. Clara met his eyes steadily. We needed supplies. I found a way to get them that doesn't involve selling your land, unless your pride is worth more than 40 acres. The silence stretched taut between them. Then Jake's shoulders sagged slightly. That land's important. Water rights. I know. That's why I didn't let you sell it. He stared at her, something shifting in his expression. You did this for the ranch. I did it for all of us. Clara turned to help Caleb unload. Now help me carry these supplies inside before they freeze. They worked in silence, but the silence felt different now, charged with understanding rather than distance. That night after Caleb was asleep, Jake knocked on her door again. When she opened it, he was holding a small wooden box. Found this in the attic, he said. Belonged to my mother. She died when I was young, so I don't remember much about her. But Eliza always said it should go to, he stopped. I want you to have it. Clara opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. It's not fancy, Jake said, but it's real, and you should have a proper wedding ring. Clara's vision blurred. She hadn't cried since arriving at the ranch, had held everything tight and controlled. But this small gesture, this acknowledgement of their partnership, it cracked something open inside her. Thank you, she whispered. Jake took the ring from the box and held out his hand. Clara gave him hers, and he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Clara, he said, still holding her hand, what you did today, going to town, finding work, protecting the land that took courage. And pride, the good kind. He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I did what needed doing. So do I, every day, but he paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. It's easier with you here. Not just the work, all of it. Jake, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Just wanted you to know you matter. To this place, to Caleb. Another pause. To me. He released her hand and stepped back, the moment breaking. Good night, Clara. Good night. But Clara stood in her doorway long after he'd gone, looking at the ring on her finger, feeling its weight. It was real, solid, permanent. And somewhere in her chest, that dangerous hope flickered brighter. The weeks that followed established a new pattern. 3 times a week, Clara drove to town with Caleb, worked her hours at the general store, while he drew pictures in the back room, then returned home with whatever supplies they needed. Mrs. Porter proved to be demanding but fair, and gradually her cool professionalism warmed into something approaching respect. You're good with numbers, Mrs. Porter said one afternoon, reviewing the ledgers Clara had reorganized. Caught 3 errors I'd missed. I like numbers. They're honest. Mrs. Porter laughed a dry sound. More honest than people usually. She paused. How's Jake managing and Caleb? Better. Jake started smiling again. Mrs. Porter nodded slowly. That's good. After Eliza died, well, the whole town worried about that boy. And Jake, she looked at Clara directly. Some folks had their doubts about you, thought you might be taking advantage. And now they're seeing you work, seeing the ranch improve, seeing Caleb happy, Mrs. Porter's expression softened slightly. You're doing right by them. That matters. It was the closest thing to acceptance Clara had received from anyone in town, and it settled something in her chest. On the drive home that evening, with Caleb drowsing against her shoulder and the sun setting in brilliant orange across the prairie, Clara allowed herself to think about the future. Not just survival, but actual life. Spring planting, summer growth, perhaps enough money to hire seasonal help, to fix the barn roof properly, to buy new stock. Perhaps even happiness. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice the horse tied outside the ranch house until she'd pulled the wagon to a stop. A gray mare. Familiar. Ruth. Clara's stomach tightened. She helped Caleb down, sent him inside with a gentle push, then squared her shoulders and followed. Ruth was in the kitchen with Jake, their voices low but intense. They both turned when Clara entered. Clara, Ruth said. Her tone was neutral, giving nothing away. I didn't know you were visiting today. Wasn't planned. Ruth's gaze swept over Clara, assessing. Came to discuss some concerns. What concerns? You're working in town. Ruth's voice sharpened. People are talking. Let them. It reflects on Jake. Makes him look like he can't provide. I'm providing for myself, Clara interrupted, and for this family. There's no shame in that. Isn't there? Ruth's voice rose. A wife working outside the home while her husband, Ruth. Jake's voice carried a warning. We've been through this. Have we? Because from where I stand, you've let this woman completely upend your life. She's working in town, making decisions about the ranch, acting like she owns the place. She does own the place, Jake said flatly. She's my wife. That makes her as much a part of this ranch as I am. Ruth stared at him, her expression shifting through surprise to something else. You actually mean that? I do. You care about her? The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jake glanced at Clara, then back at his sister. Yes, he said simply. I do. Clara's breath caught. It was the first time he'd acknowledged anything beyond their practical arrangement, and hearing him say it to Ruth, who'd been Eliza's friend, felt monumental. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she moved to the stove, poured herself coffee with familiar ease, and sat at the table. Tell me about the kittens, she said to Clara. Jake mentioned them in his last letter. Said Caleb's been naming them. It was an olive branch, unexpected and genuine. Clara sat down across from her. 4 of them. Caleb named them Cloud, Storm, River, and Sky. He checks on them every morning and evening. And he's still not speaking. Not yet, but he's more present, more engaged. Ruth nodded slowly. Liza would have liked that, liked seeing him heal. She looked at Clara directly. She would have liked you, I think. The admission clearly cost her, and Clara honored it with honesty. I hope so. I'm trying to honor her memory while making my own place here. That's a hard balance. It is, but it's necessary. Ruth sipped her coffee, her expression thoughtful. I came here prepared to fight you, to protect Caleb and Jake from what I assumed was a woman taking advantage. She paused. But watching how Jake looks at you, how he defends you, I see I was wrong, or partly wrong anyway. You love them? Clara said. That's not wrong. No, but I can love them and still trust you with them. Ruth stood, setting down her cup. I should go. Long ride home. At the door, she turned back. The town dance is in 3 weeks. Spring celebration. You should come. All 3 of you. Let people see you're a real family. After she left, Jake and Clara stood in the quiet kitchen, the evening shadows lengthening around them. You defended me, Clara said. Told you you're my wife. But you said you cared. That's different than partnership. Jake was quiet, his expression unreadable in the dimming light. Then, yeah, it is different. Jake, don't need to talk about it now. He moved toward the door, then paused. But it's true, just so you know. He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the porch steps as he headed toward the barn. Clara stood alone in the kitchen, her hand unconsciously moving to the ring on her finger. The arrangement they'd made, practical, sensible, emotionally distant, was shifting into something else, something more complicated and more real. And she had no idea if that was salvation or disaster. The morning of the town dance arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if spring had finally decided to commit to its promises. Clara stood in front of the small mirror in her room, studying her reflection with critical eyes. The dress she'd chosen was simple dark blue cotton with ivory lace at the collar, but it was clean and well-fitted, and the color brought out the green in her eyes. Behind her on the bed lay the dress she'd made for Caleb, new trousers, and a white shirt carefully stitched during late evenings after he'd gone to sleep. She'd embroidered a small horse on the pocket, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. A knock on the door startled her. Come in. Jake entered, stopping just inside the threshold. He was dressed in clothes she'd never seen him wear: dark trousers, a white shirt, a vest that had been stored away in a trunk. He'd shaved, trimmed his hair, made an effort that transformed him from a rough rancher into something almost elegant. They stared at each other for a long moment. You look, Jake started, then seemed to lose the words. That's a good dress. Thank you. You look well, too. He cleared his throat, his hand moving to his vest pocket. Brought you something. He pulled out a small velvet box worn at the edges. These were Eliza's, her mother's before that. Ruth brought them last time she visited. Said you should have them. Clara opened the box carefully. Inside were simple pearl earrings, luminous against the dark velvet. Jake, I can't. Yes, you can. His voice was firm. Your family now. Ruth knows it, I know it. He paused. Time you knew it too. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she fastened the earrings. They were cool against her skin, a weight that felt both foreign and right. Are you nervous? Jake asked. About tonight. Should I be? Town can be judgmental. People might say things. Then we'll deal with it together. Clara met his eyes in the mirror. That's what partners do, isn't it? Something shifted in Jake's expression, softening the hard lines of his face. Yeah, that's exactly what they do. Caleb appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his new clothes, his hair dampened and combed. He looked between them, then held up his slate. On it, he'd drawn the three of them in careful detail standing together. That's us, Clara said, crouching to his level. That's our family. Caleb nodded seriously, then reached out to touch the pearls at her ears. His small fingers were gentle, reverent. They were your mama's, Jake said quietly. Now they're Clara's. That means they're still in the family, still being cared for. Caleb looked at his father, then at Clara, and something in his expression seemed to settle, as if a question he'd been carrying had finally been answered. The ride to town was quiet but comfortable. Caleb sat between them, his slate abandoned for once, his attention caught by the landscape rolling past. Other wagons appeared on the road as they drew closer to Salvation families in their Sunday best, heading toward the same destination. The town hall was decorated with spring flowers and colored ribbons, the doors thrown open to let in the warm air. Music spilled out, a fiddle and piano playing, something lively. People clustered in groups outside, talking and laughing, their voices carrying across the evening. Clara felt Jake tense beside her as they pulled the wagon to a stop. She understood. This was the first time they'd appeared in public as a family, the first time the town would see them together outside of brief transactions at the general store. Ready? She asked softly. No, but let's go anyway. They walked toward the hall together, Caleb between them holding both their hands. Conversations paused as they approached, eyes tracked their progress. Clara kept her chin up, her expression pleasant but not apologetic. Mrs. Porter appeared in the doorway, resplendent in a purple dress that softened her usual severity. Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Mercer, Caleb, welcome. Her voice carried deliberately loud, and several nearby conversations resumed as if her greeting had given permission. Thank you for having us, Clara said. Wouldn't be much of a town dance without the whole town, would it? Mrs. Porter's eyes twinkled. Come in. Food's on the tables to the left. Dancing's in the center. Try the apple cake. Mrs. Henderson outdid herself this year. Inside, the hall was warm and bright, filled with the mingled scents of perfume, pipe tobacco, and food. Long tables lined one wall, laden with dishes each family had contributed. The center of the room had been cleared for dancing, where couples already moved to the music. Caleb's eyes went wide, taking in the spectacle. He'd probably never seen anything like this, the colors, the movement, the sheer noise of so many people gathered together. Want to get some food? Clara asked him. He nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. They made their way to the tables, Jake a solid presence at her back. Other families greeted them, some warmly, some with careful politeness, a few with thinly veiled curiosity. Clara responded to each with the same calm courtesy, refusing to be ruffled by the scrutiny. Jake Mercer, as I live and breathe, a man in his 40s, approached, his smile genuine. Haven't seen you at one of these in years. Tom? Jake shook his hand. Didn't think I'd be back. But, he glanced at Clara. Circumstances changed. Tom's gaze shifted to Clara, assessing but kind. You must be the new Mrs. Mercer. Tom Fletcher, I run the livery. Clara, pleased to meet you. Likewise. Heard you've been working at Mrs. Porter's place, doing good work from what I hear. I try. Tom crouched down to Caleb's level. And this must be young Caleb. Your pa tells me you're good with horses. Caleb nodded, his expression serious. Well, if you ever want to come by the livery, I've got a mare, just had a foal. Thought you might like to see it. Caleb's face lit up. He looked at Jake, then at Clara, his question clear. We can visit, Clara assured him. Maybe next week when we're in town. Tom stood, clapping Jake on the shoulder. Good to see you out, friend. Been too long. As Tom moved away, Jake let out a breath. That wasn't so bad. Did you expect it to be worse? Expected some people to be less welcoming. The night's young yet, Clara said dryly. She was proven right 20 minutes later, When a woman in an elaborate green dress approached her, smile sharp at the edges. Two other women flanked her, their expressions mirroring hers. "Mrs. Mercer," the woman in green said. "I'm Carolyn Webster. We haven't been formally introduced." "Mrs. Webster." Clara recognized the name. The Websters owned one of the larger ranches outside town, prosperous and influential. "I must say you've caused quite a stir, appearing out of nowhere, marrying so quickly." Caroline's tone suggested concern, but her eyes were calculating. "Some of us worry about dear Jake being taken advantage of in his vulnerable state." "Is that so?" "Well, naturally, a man alone grieving with a child to raise, he'd be susceptible to, shall we say, opportunistic women." The insult was delivered with a smile wrapped in false sympathy. The women beside Caroline nodded in agreement, their gazes assessing Clara like she was livestock at auction. Clara felt Jake stiffen beside her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm before he could speak. "Mrs. Webster," Clara said, her voice pleasant and cold, "I appreciate your concern for my husband. It speaks well of your caring nature. However, I assure you that our marriage is based on mutual respect and partnership. If you have concerns about Jake's well-being, perhaps you should direct them to him, as he's perfectly capable of managing his own affairs." Caroline's smile faltered slightly. "I simply meant—" "I know exactly what you meant." Clara's tone didn't change. "And now we understand each other perfectly. If you'll excuse us, I promised Caleb some of that apple cake." She guided Caleb away, Jake following. Behind them, she heard one of Caroline's companions whisper something, followed by muffled laughter. "You handled that well," Jake said quietly. "Did I? I wanted to say considerably more." "I know, but you kept it civil. He paused. "Eliza used to get flustered when people said things." "Let it eat at her. You just cut clean through the nonsense. Life's too short to waste on people like that." They found a relatively quiet corner where Caleb could eat his cake and watch the dancers. Ruth appeared shortly after, her expression warm. "Saw your encounter with Caroline Webster," she said, settling beside them. "Well done. That woman's been trying to marry off her daughter to every eligible rancher for years. Probably sees you as competition." "Competition for what?" "For Jake, of course. When Eliza died, half the unmarried women in the county started circling, thinking they'd snatch up a widower with land. The fact that he chose you, an outsider, someone they didn't pick, stuck in their craw." Clara hadn't considered this angle. She glanced at Jake, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Never encouraged any of them," he muttered. "Didn't have to," Ruth said. "Available man with property is encouragement enough for some." She smiled. "They're just bitter. You made your own choice." The music shifted to something slower, and couples moved onto the floor. Caleb watched with fascination, his cake forgotten. "Want to dance?" Jake asked suddenly. Clara turned to him, surprised. "Do you dance?" "Not well, but seems like we should show them where—" He struggled for words. "Together." It was both a practical suggestion and something more vulnerable. Clara stood brushing crumbs from her skirt. "All right, then." Ruth volunteered to stay with Caleb, who was content to watch and draw on his slate. Jake led Clara onto the floor, his hands settling at her waist with careful formality. "I wasn't lying," he said as they began moving. "I really can't dance well. Just follow the music. I'll help." They moved together awkwardly. At first, Jake too stiff, Clara compensating for his lack of rhythm. But gradually they found a pattern. Nothing graceful but functional. And Clara became aware of how close they were standing, of Jake's hand warm against her back, of the scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "People are watching," Jake said quietly. "Let them. Does it bother you what they think?" Clara considered this. "It bothers me that they judge without knowing. But their opinions don't change what's real, what we're building." "And what are we building?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Clara looked up at him, meeting his dark eyes. "Something good, I think. Something worth protecting." Jake's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Yeah, I think so too." The music ended and they separated with the other couples. But as they walked back to where Ruth and Caleb waited, Jake's hand found the small of Clara's back, guiding her through the crowd. It was a small gesture, possessive in the best way. A public claim that said more than words could. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and conversation. Tom Fletcher introduced them to several other ranchers' men who treated Jake with easy camaraderie and Clara with cautious respect. Mrs. Porter pulled Clara aside to discuss the next week's work schedule, her manner all business, but her tone approving. Caleb received attention from several families with children who were curious about the quiet boy who drew such detailed pictures. He showed them his slate shyly, and when a little girl asked if he could draw her dog, he carefully sketched it, his tongue poking out in concentration. As the night wore on, Clara noticed Jake relaxing incrementally. His shoulders loosened, his rare smile appeared more frequently. When someone made a joke, he actually laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. This was what he'd lost when Eliza died, Clara realized. Not just his wife, but his place in the community, his connection to the world beyond his failing ranch. Grief had isolated him, and pride had kept him isolated. Around 10 o'clock, Caleb began drooping against Ruth's side, his eyes heavy. "Time to get this one home," she said. They made their farewells and headed into the cool night. The stars were brilliant overhead, the spring air carrying the scent of new grass and possibility. Caleb fell asleep almost immediately in the wagon, his head pillowed on Clara's lap. "That went better than expected," Jake said as they drove through the darkness. "It did. He paused, searching for words. "You were perfect. How you handled Caroline, how you talked to people like you belonged. Maybe you do belong. Maybe I do." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the stars wheeling overhead, the horses finding their way home by instinct. "Clara," Jake said quietly, What I said earlier about caring, I meant it. Just want you to know that. This isn't just a business arrangement anymore. Not for me." Her breath caught. "Not for me either." "So where does that leave us?" "I don't know. Somewhere different than where we started." "Different can be good." "It can be." The ranch appeared over the rise, dark against the star-filled sky. Home, Clara thought, somehow without her noticing exactly when it had become home. They put the wagon away in silence, working together with practiced efficiency. Jake carried Caleb up to bed while Clara banked the stove, checked the locks, did all the small tasks that ended a day. When Jake came back downstairs, she was standing by the window looking out at the dark prairie. "Thank you," he said, "for tonight, for everything." Clara turned to face him. In the dim lamplight, his features were softer, more open than usual. "You don't need to thank me. I do, though." He moved closer, stopping just an arm's length away. "Before you came, I was drowning. Didn't even realize how bad it was until you were here, and suddenly things were easier. Not easy, but possible." He reached out his fingers, brushing her cheek with unexpected gentleness. "I care about you, Clara, really care, and I don't know what to do with that." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought about all the walls she'd built around herself since Daniel died, all the carefully maintained distance she'd kept even here, even with this man who'd offered her safety when she had nothing. "I care about you too," she whispered. "That's what frightens me." "Why?" "Because caring means risking, and I've already lost so much." "So have I." Jake's thumb traced her jawline. "But maybe we've lost enough. Maybe it's time to risk finding something instead." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Clara didn't move. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle, tentative. Nothing like the desperate passion of romance novels. It was better than that honest, careful, full of question marks and possibility. When they separated, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "Is this all right?" he asked. "Yes." "What happens now?" Clara considered this. They were married, legally bound, living in the same house. But they'd maintained careful boundaries. Separate rooms, separate lives running parallel. What Jake was asking was whether those boundaries could shift. "We take it slow," she said finally. "We've built something good on partnership and respect. We don't rush and risk breaking it." "Slow, I can do." Jake pulled back slightly, his expression serious. "But I want you to know this is real for me. You're real for me. You're real for me, too." He kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that made her throat tight. Then he stepped back, putting space between them again. "Should get some sleep. Morning comes early." "It does." But they stood there a moment longer, neither quite willing to end the moment. Finally, Jake moved toward the stairs. "Good night, Clara." "Good night." She listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the sound of his door closing. Then she extinguished the lamp and made her way to her own room, her fingers touching her lips where he'd kissed her. Everything was changing. The practical arrangement was transforming into something more complex, more real, more dangerous. But as Clara climbed into bed, the pearl earrings carefully placed in their box on her dresser, she realized she wasn't afraid of the change. She was ready for it. The next week brought a shift in the household dynamics, subtle but unmistakable. Jake found small excuses to be near Clara, helping with tasks he'd previously left to her, lingering over coffee in the mornings, sitting beside her in the evenings while she mended clothes. Nothing dramatic, nothing presumptuous, just presence steady and warm. Clara responded in kind. She made his favorite meals without being asked, left coffee warming on the stove when he worked late, sought his opinion on household decisions she could have made alone. They were learning each other, finding the rhythm of partnership shifting into something deeper. Caleb noticed. Of course he did. Children were observant in ways adults forgot. He watched them with those serious dark eyes, and his drawings began to change. The three figures he'd been sketching appeared closer together now, sometimes holding hands, sometimes arranged around a table that looked like family rather than convenience. One morning, Clara was working in the kitchen when she heard Caleb's footsteps on the stairs, faster than usual, urgent. He burst into the room, his face alight with something she'd never seen before. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the door. "What is it?" she asked, but he was already dragging her outside across the yard to the barn. Jake was there repairing a saddle. He looked up in surprise as Caleb pulled Clara inside, pointing excitedly at the stall where the cat family lived. One of the kittens, the smallest, the one Caleb had named Cloud, was standing on wobbly legs, exploring beyond the nest for the first time. Its eyes were fully open now, bright and curious, and it mewed at them with tiny insistence. "Oh, look at you," Clara breathed. "Aren't you brave?" Caleb knelt beside her, his whole body trembling with excitement. He reached out slowly, letting the kitten sniff his fingers before gently stroking its head. Jake came to stand beside them, his hand settling on Caleb's shoulder. "Getting big, aren't they?" Caleb nodded vigorously. Then he did something extraordinary. He looked up at Jake, then at Clara, and his mouth opened. No sound came out, but the effort was there, visible in the tension of his small jaw, the way his lips formed shapes. He was trying to speak. Clara's heart clenched. She glanced at Jake, saw her own hope and fear reflected in his expression. They'd been told not to push, to let Caleb find his voice in his own time. But seeing him try, seeing him want to share his joy so badly that he'd attempt to break his year-long silence, it was almost unbearable. "It's all right," Clara said softly, touching his back. "You don't have to say anything. We can see how happy you are." Caleb's shoulders sagged slightly, the moment of effort passing. But he smiled at her, a real smile, and pointed to the kitten, then to himself, his meaning clear. "Yes," Clara confirmed. "Cloud is yours. We'll take good care of him together." After Caleb returned to playing with the kittens, Jake and Clara stood in the barn doorway watching him. "He tried," Jake said, his voice rough. "That's the first time since—" "I know. Do you think he will eventually—" "I think he'll speak when he's ready, when he has something he needs to say more than he needs to stay silent." Jake nodded, his jaw tight with emotion. "Eliza used to say that too, that he'd talk when the words mattered enough." It was the first time he'd mentioned Eliza naturally, without pain tightening his voice. Clara took that as the gift it was. "She sounds like she was wise." "She was." Jake looked at Clara. "You would have liked each other, I think." "I hope so." They stood together in the warm sunshine, watching Caleb and the kittens, and Clara realized this was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past, but making room for it alongside the present. Not replacing what was lost, but honoring it while building something new. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the road to the ranch, moving fast. Jake straightened from his work, his hand automatically moving to the rifle he kept nearby. But as the rider drew closer, Clara recognized the horse. "Ruth!" Ruth pulled up in the yard, her face flushed from the hard ride. "Jake," Clara. "Thank God you're both here." "What's wrong?" Jake asked, already moving toward her. "It's Samuel Bennett. His wife Grace went into labor early and there's trouble. The midwife's sick, can't come. Doctor's out at the Morrison place for an emergency. They need help." Ruth's gaze fixed on Clara. "You've birthed babies before, haven't you?" Clara's stomach dropped. My husband and I lost a child. I helped my sister with hers, but that's more experiences than anyone else available. Ruth interrupted. Please, Clara. Grace is frightened, and Samuel doesn't know what to do. They need you. Clara looked at Jake, saw her own uncertainty reflected in his face. But she also saw trust their confidence in her capability even when she doubted herself. I'll get my things, she said. The ride to the Bennett place took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Ruth led the way, her horse at a hard gallop. Clara followed on the mare Jake had saddled for her, her medical supplies, what little she had secured in a canvas bag. Jake stayed behind with Caleb, his face tight with worry, as he watched her leave. The Bennett home was a modest structure on the edge of town surrounded by corrals and outbuildings that spoke of a man who worked with his hands and made an honest living. Samuel met them at the door, his face pale and stricken. Thank God, he said, stepping aside. She's upstairs. It's been hours and nothing's progressing right. Clara followed him up the narrow stairs, her heart hammering. She hadn't told Ruth the full truth. Yes, she'd helped her sister birth two healthy children, but she'd also held her own stillborn daughter, had felt the weight of loss so profound it had nearly destroyed her. The thought of facing that again, of being responsible for another woman's child, she pushed the fear down. Grace Bennett needed help, not Clara's trauma. The bedroom was small and warm, the windows covered to keep out drafts. Grace lay on the bed, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face contorted with pain. She looked young, no more than 25, and terrified. Mrs. Mercer, she gasped. Thank you for coming. Call me Clara. She moved to the bedside, setting down her bag. Tell me what's happening. The pain started last night. They were far apart at first, but now they're constant, and nothing's... Her voice broke off in a cry as another contraction seized her. Clara waited until it passed, then gently examined her. What she found made her stomach clench. The baby was positioned wrong, turned slightly, and Grace's body was exhausted from hours of fruitless labor. Samuel, Clara called. I need hot water, clean linens, and lamplight. Ruth, stay with me. Samuel fled downstairs, grateful for something to do. Ruth moved to the other side of the bed, her expression grim. She'd seen difficult births before, knew the signs. Can you turn the baby? Ruth asked quietly. I can try. Clara rolled up her sleeves, her hands already shaking. She thought of her own daughter, never given a chance to draw breath. She thought of Caleb, silent and grieving. She thought of all the fragile lives that depended on the competence and courage of the people around them. Grace, she said, I need you to listen carefully. Your baby isn't positioned right. I'm going to try to help, but it's going to hurt. Grace's eyes widened with fresh fear. Will the baby be all right? I'm going to do everything I can. It was the only honest answer Clara could give. Samuel returned with the water and linens, his hands fumbling. Clara washed thoroughly, then turned back to Grace. When the next contraction comes, I need you to push with everything you have, and I'm going to try to guide the baby into the right position. Do you understand? Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face. I trust you. The weight of those words settled on Clara's shoulders like a mantle. What followed was an hour of the most intense work Clara had ever done. Grace screamed, herself hoarse, pushing with a strength that seemed impossible from her small frame. Clara worked with steady hands, feeling for the baby's position, gently manipulating, trying to coax the child into the birth canal. Ruth held Grace's hand, wiped her face, whispered encouragement. Samuel paced downstairs, his footsteps a constant rhythm beneath them. Twice Clara thought they'd lost the baby. The heartbeat faded and panic surged through her. But she kept working, kept her hands steady even as her mind screamed. And then finally she felt the shift. The baby turned properly aligned. Now, Grace, Clara said urgently. Push, now, give me everything. Grace bore down with a guttural cry, her body arching. Clara guided the baby's head, then shoulders, and suddenly the child was there, slipping into her hands, small and slick, and blessedly, miraculously alive. A thin wail filled the room. It's a girl, Clara said, her voice breaking. You have a daughter. She worked quickly, clearing the baby's airways, cutting the cord, wrapping the tiny body in clean linen. The infant's cries grew stronger, indignant at being thrust into the cold world. Clara placed her in Grace's arms, watching as the young mother's face transformed with wonder and relief. She's beautiful, Grace whispered. "Oh, Samuel, Samuel, come see." Samuel thundered up the stairs, his eyes red-rimmed. When he saw his wife and daughter, he let out a sound between a laugh and a sob, dropping to his knees beside the bed. Clara stepped back, giving them space, her legs suddenly weak. Ruth caught her arm. "You did it," Ruth said quietly. "You saved them both." Clara nodded, unable to speak. The adrenaline was leaving her body in waves, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion and something else. Relief. Redemption, perhaps. She'd held death in her hands once with her own daughter. But today, she'd held life. And life had won. She finished the necessary work, checking Grace, ensuring the afterbirth came properly, making sure both mother and child were stable. Samuel hovered nearby, useless, and devoted his eyes, never leaving his new daughter. "What will you name her?" Clara asked as she washed her hands. Grace looked up, her expression glowing. "Hope. Her name is Hope." It was almost too perfect, too symbolic. But looking at the baby's scrunched face, at Grace's exhausted joy, at Samuel's wonder, Clara thought maybe it was exactly right. Hope was what they all needed, what kept them fighting through the hard seasons. By the time Clara and Ruth left, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Samuel walked them to their horses, his gratitude spilling over in words that tumbled together. "Don't know how to thank you. Don't know what we'd have done if you hadn't—" "You would have managed," Clara said, though she wasn't sure that was true. "But I'm glad I could help. Anything you need, ever, you just ask." Samuel's voice was fervent. "You saved my family. That's a debt I can't repay." "Then don't try. Just take good care of them." The ride back to the ranch was slower, both women and horses exhausted. Ruth was quiet for a long time, then spoke. "I was wrong about you," she said abruptly. "When Jake first married you, I thought a lot of uncharitable things. I know what you thought. But watching you today, seeing you work—" Ruth paused. "You're not what I assumed. You're strong, capable, and you genuinely care about people." She glanced at Clara. "Jake is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him too. Do you love him?" The question hung in the darkening air. Clara thought about how to answer, about the slow shift from survival to partnership to something deeper. "I'm learning to," she said finally. "It wasn't love at first. We both know that. But it's becoming love. Real love built on respect and work and choosing each other every day." Ruth nodded slowly. "That's the best kind, I think. The kind that lasts." When they reached the ranch, Jake was waiting in the yard, Caleb beside him. The moment Clara dismounted, Jake crossed to her, his eyes searching her face. "How?" "Mother and baby are fine. A girl. They named her Hope." Relief flooded his expression. He pulled her into his arms without hesitation, holding her close. Clara let herself lean against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body. After a moment, she felt small arms wrap around her legs, Caleb joining the embrace. They stood that way for a long moment, the three of them, while Ruth quietly led the horses to the barn. "I was worried," Jake said against her hair. "Couldn't stop thinking about you dealing with that alone." "I wasn't alone. Ruth was there. Still, it's a hard thing bringing life into the world." "Yes." Clara pulled back slightly to look at him. "But it's a good thing, too. I helped today. Really helped. It felt like healing." "Yes." Jake cupped her face with his calloused hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "You're remarkable, you know that." Before she could respond, he kissed her. Not the tentative kiss from the dance, but something deeper, more certain. A kiss that spoke of relief and pride and feelings still too new to name completely. When they separated, Caleb was watching them with serious eyes. Then slowly he smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and transformed his solemn face into something luminous. He pointed to them, then to himself, then made the heart shape with his hands again. "We love you too," Clara said softly. That night, after Caleb was asleep and Ruth had ridden home, Clara and Jake sat on the porch in the spring darkness. The air was mild, carrying the scent of new growth and possibility. "Things are changing," Jake said, "between us." "They are. Is that all right with you?" Clara thought about the question, about everything that had happened since she'd knocked on his door that frozen February night. She thought about partnership evolving into affection, affection deepening into something more profound. "It's more than all right," she said. "It's what I want." Jake took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "I never thought I'd feel this way again. After Eliza, I thought that part of my life was over. that the best I could hope for was to survive to raise Caleb to keep the ranch from falling apart. And now I think maybe there's more. Maybe we can build something new. Not replacing what was, but creating something different. Something ours. Clara squeezed Hannah's hand. I'd like that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Finally, Jake spoke again. Would you, he stopped, started over. Your room. You could move into mine if you wanted. We're married and I know we started this as convenience, but it's not that anymore. At least not for me. Clara's heart raced. It was a practical question on the surface, but underneath it was everything else: vulnerability, hope, the willingness to truly merge their lives instead of keeping them carefully separate. Not tonight, she said slowly. I'm exhausted and I need to think, but she turned to face him. Ask me again tomorrow, when I've had time to be sure. You need to be sure, don't you? Jake considered this. Yeah, I do. This isn't something to rush into just because we can. It should mean something. It already means something. Then tomorrow, he agreed. But he didn't release her hand, and they sat together until the chill finally drove them inside. At the base of the stairs, Jake pulled her close, once more kissing her forehead. Sleep well, Clara. You too. In her room, Clara undressed slowly, her body aching from the long day. She thought about Grace Bennett and baby Hope, about the fragile miracle of new life. She thought about Jake's invitation, about what it would mean to truly join their lives in every way. She'd been a wife before, had shared a bed with Daniel, had known physical intimacy. But this felt different, weighted with more significance. With Daniel, love had been easy, given freely from the start. With Jake, love was being built brick by careful brick, and the foundation needed to be solid before they could raise the walls higher. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow she'd know what to say. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Clara woke early as always and made her way downstairs to start the stove. But when she reached the kitchen, she found Jake already there. Coffee brewing, eggs, and bacon cooking. Morning, he said, looking almost shy. Thought I'd let you sleep in after yesterday. You didn't have to. Wanted to. He gestured to the table. Sit. Food's almost ready. She sat watching him move around the kitchen with surprising competence. He wasn't as efficient as she was, but he managed well enough. When he set a plate in front of her, the eggs were only slightly overdone. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. He poured coffee for both of them, then sat across from her. Clara, about last night. Yes, he blinked. Yes. Yes, I'll move my things into your room. Yes, I want to really be your wife in every way. Yes to all of it. She met his eyes steadily. I spent half the night thinking, and every answer came back the same. This is what I want. You're what I want. Jake's expression transformed, relief and joy warring with something deeper. You're sure? I'm sure. Are you? Never been more sure of anything. They sat there grinning at each other like fools until Caleb appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked between them, sensing something had shifted, then climbed into Clara's lap without hesitation. She held him close, and Jake reached across the table to cover her free hand with his. This, Clara thought. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not without its complications, but real and chosen and full of hard-won love. After breakfast, while Jake worked on repairs, Clara moved her belongings into his room. It didn't take long, she still didn't own much, but each item she placed on the dresser beside his. Each dress she hung in the wardrobe next to his shirts felt significant, an act of commitment, of trust, of hope. The room itself was plain but comfortable. A large bed with a quilt. Eliza had made a dresser, a chair by the window. Clara touched the quilt gently, feeling the careful stitches. You don't have to use that, Jake said from the doorway, startling her. If it bothers you, I can put it away. It doesn't bother me. Clara traced a pattern in the fabric. She made beautiful things. I can honor that. You're generous. I'm practical. This is a good quilt, and it keeps you warm. No reason to put it away out of false sentiment. Jake crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. Have I told you lately that you're remarkable? You may have mentioned it. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Clara felt heat rise between them. But after a moment, he pulled back. Not now, he said, his voice rough. When we have time. When Caleb's asleep and we can do this right. Clara nodded, understanding. This deserved more than a hurried encounter in broad daylight, with a child liable to appear at any moment. Tonight, she agreed. Fine. So, the day passed in a haze of anticipation and nervous energy. Clara threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganizing pantry shelves that were already organized. Jake was equally distracted, starting tasks and abandoning them, his attention clearly elsewhere. Only Caleb seemed oblivious, playing with his kittens in the barn, showing them to every person or animal he encountered. Late in the afternoon, a wagon appeared on the road. Samuel Bennett, with Grace bundled beside him and baby Hope in her arms. "Wanted to thank you proper," Samuel said as they climbed down, "and to let the whole town know what you did for us." "That's not necessary," Clara said. "It is, though." Grace's voice was firm despite her exhaustion. "You saved Hope's life. Probably saved mine, too. People need to know what kind of woman you are." Word spread fast in a small town. By the next day, 3 more women had stopped by the ranch asking if Clara would attend their births when the time came. By the end of the week, Mrs. Porter pulled her aside at the general store. "Seems you've become the unofficial midwife," Mrs. Porter said. "Town could use one, with the doctor getting older and the nearest hospital 2 days' ride." "I'm not trained. You're experienced enough and you care about the outcome. That matters more than any certificate." Mrs. Porter's expression softened. "Think about it. Could be good for you, good for the town, too." Clara did think about it. The idea of having a purpose beyond keeping house, of using her hard-won knowledge to help others, appealed to something deep inside her. But it would mean time away from the ranch, from Jake and Caleb. She discussed it with Jake that night after Caleb was asleep. They lay in bed together, the newness of sharing space still strange and wonderful. "What do you think?" she asked after explaining Mrs. Porter's suggestion. "I think you'd be good at it. But it would mean leaving sometimes, being gone when women need help." "We'd manage." Jake's hand traced patterns on her shoulder. "You've given up a lot to be here, Clara. Your home, your past, your independence in some ways. If this is something you want to do, something that gives you purpose beyond us, then you should do it. You wouldn't resent it." "No, I'd be proud." He tilted her face up to look at him. "We're partners, remember? That means supporting each other, not holding each other back." Clara kissed him, grateful for his understanding. What had started as a business arrangement had become a true partnership, built on mutual respect and growing love. The physical intimacy between them had been surprisingly easy. Jake was gentle but passionate, attentive to her needs, and they'd found a natural rhythm together. Clara had worried it might feel like a betrayal of Daniel's memory, but instead it felt like a different chapter in her life. Love took many forms, and what she had with Jake was valid and real, even if it had grown differently than her first marriage. "I'll do it then," she said. "Tell Mrs. Porter, yes." "Good." They fell asleep, tangled together, warm and content. The following weeks established a new pattern. Clara continued her work at the general store 3 days a week, but now she also carried a bag of medical supplies for emergency calls. She attended 2 births successfully, helped a woman through a difficult recovery, and slowly built a reputation as someone reliable and competent. The ranch improved too. With Clara's earnings and the slowly increasing livestock sales, Jake was able to make needed repairs, purchase better, seed, hire temporary help for the heavy spring planting. The place began to look less like a failing enterprise and more like a working ranch. Caleb continued to heal in his own way. He still didn't speak, but his efforts to communicate grew more complex. He used his slate, constantly drawing detailed pictures to express ideas. And he'd started making small sounds, humming, while he played, laughing when the kittens did something amusing. One evening in late May, with the windows open to let in the warm air and the sound of crickets, Clara sat at the table helping Caleb with his letters. Jake was at the stove making tea, and the domesticity of the scene struck Clara with sudden force. This was happiness, she realized. Not dramatic or overwhelming, but steady and real. The 3 of them together, safe and warm, building a life from the wreckage of their individual losses. Caleb finished writing his name on the slate and looked up at her for approval. She smiled and nodded, ruffling his hair. And then, in a voice rusty from disuse but clear as morning, Caleb spoke. "Thank you, Mama." The slate fell from Clara's hands, clattering on the floor. Jake spun from the stove, his eyes wide. They both stared at Caleb, who looked between them with a mixture of nervousness and pride. "What?" Clara's voice broke. "What did you call me?" Caleb's chin lifted slightly. "Mama," louder this time, more certain. You're my mama now." Clara pulled him into her arms, tears streaming down her face. She looked over his head at Jake, who stood frozen by the stove, his own eyes bright with moisture. "He spoke," Jake said, his voice wondering. "He called you." "I know." Caleb pulled back, looking at Clara seriously. "Is that okay? Can I call you that?" "Yes," Clara managed. "Yes, sweetheart, that's more than okay." He smiled then, that brilliant, transformative smile, and hugged her again. "Good, because that's what you are." Jake crossed to them, wrapping both of them in his arms. They stood there in the warm kitchen, the three of them holding each other, while outside the spring night settled soft and gentle over the prairie. Caleb had found his voice. And in doing so, he'd spoken the truth they had all been dancing around. They weren't playing at being a family anymore. They were one forged through hardship and choice and love that had grown slowly but surely from the smallest seeds. Later, after Caleb was asleep, though it had taken longer than usual, as he couldn't stop talking, making up for a year of silence, with an avalanche of words, Clara and Jake sat on the porch. "Mama," Jake said softly. "He called you Mama." "I never asked him to, never expected." "I know, that's why it matters." Jake took her hand. "He chose it, chose you. Not because we told him to, but because that's how he sees you." "How do you feel about that?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "Eliza will always be his mother, the woman who gave him life. But you're the one raising him, loving him, being there for him every day. There's room for both truths. You're sure, I'm sure," he pulled her close. "You're his mother in every way that matters, and I'm grateful for that. Grateful for you." They sat in the darkness, listening to the night sounds, wrapped in each other and the peace of finally truly being home. Summer arrived in full force, transforming the Nebraska prairie from brown to green, from dormant to abundant. The change seemed to mirror everything happening at the Mercer Ranch, as if the land itself was celebrating the transformation taking place within the weathered walls of the house. Caleb's voice, once unleashed, became an endless stream of questions, observations, and stories. He narrated his days with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time, his words tumbling over each other in their eagerness to be heard. At meals, he chattered about the kittens, now half-grown, and hunting mice in the barn. During chores, he asked why the sky was blue, where the wind came from, whether horses dreamed. At night, he required 3 stories before sleep and often fell asleep mid-sentence, telling Clara about his plans for the next day. "Does he ever stop talking?" Jake asked one evening, though his tone was affectionate rather than annoyed. "Not if he can help it," Clara replied, smiling. "I think he's making up for an entire year." "Reckon he's got about 11 months left to go then." They were in the garden Clara had planted behind the house, checking on the vegetables that were finally starting to show promise. Caleb was nearby, conducting an elaborate conversation with Cloud, the kitten who'd become his constant companion. "The beans are coming in well," Clara said, examining the vines. "We'll have enough to put up for winter, maybe even some to trade in town." Jake straightened from inspecting the tomato plants, his hand moving to the small of his back. The ranch work was endless, but the strain was easier now, with better nutrition and the knowledge that their efforts were actually building towards something sustainable. "Never thought I'd see this place producing again," he said quietly. "After Eliza died, after everything started falling apart, I'd given up on it. Was just going through the motions." Clara moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "And now I see a future, not just survival, but actual life." He looked at her, his dark eyes warm. "That's because of you. What you've built here." "We've built," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without your willingness to let me try to trust me." "Trust was easy. You earned it that first night, walking out of a blizzard with nothing but spine holding you together." Their conversation was interrupted by Caleb's excited shout. "Mama, Papa, come look!" They turned to find him pointing at the fence line where a rider was approaching. As the figure drew closer, Clara recognized Ruth's gray mare, but there was a second horse following, carrying someone else. Ruth pulled up in the yard, her expression unusually animated. The second rider was a young woman, perhaps 18 or 19, with Ruth's dark eyes and determined chin. "Jake, Clara," Ruth said, dismounting. "This is my niece, Catherine, Eliza's younger sister." The introduction landed like a stone in still water. Clara felt Jake stiffen beside her, saw Caleb's excited expression fade into wariness. Catherine dismounted slowly, her gaze sweeping over the ranch, the garden finally settling on Caleb. "Oh my," she breathed. "He looks just like Eliza." "Catherine," Ruth's tone carried a warning. "We discussed this." "I know, Aunt Ruth. I'm sorry." Catherine's attention shifted to Clara and her expression cooled. "You must be the new wife." "Clara Mercer," Clara said, extending her hand. "Pleased to meet you." Catherine took her hand briefly, her grip limp. "I'm sure. I've come from St. Louis to see my nephew. It's been over a year since my sister died, and I haven't been able to visit until now." "You're welcome here," Jake said, though his voice was cautious. "How long are you planning to stay?" "That depends." Catherine's gaze returned to Caleb, who had moved closer to Clara, his hand gripping her skirt. "I'd like to spend time with Caleb. Get to know him. He's all I have left of Eliza." Ruth's expression was tight. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside, over coffee." In the kitchen, tension settled over the table like a physical presence. Catherine sat across from Clara, her posture perfect, her dress expensive and impractical for ranch life. She accepted coffee, but didn't drink it, her attention fixed on Caleb, who sat pressed against Clara's side. "He's gotten so big," Catherine said. "Eliza would hardly recognize him." "Children grow," Jake said flatly. "Yes, they do, especially when they don't have their mother." Catherine's tone was pointed. "I tried to come sooner, but my father wouldn't permit it. He didn't handle Eliza's death well. None of us did." "That's understandable," Clara said carefully. "Is it?" Catherine's gaze sharpened. "Because from what I hear, this household moved on rather quickly. A new wife within months of my sister's death. A stranger raising her child." "Catherine," Ruth's voice was sharp, "that's enough. Is it I have a right to be concerned? Caleb is my blood, and I want to ensure he's being properly cared for." "He's being more than properly cared for," Jake said, his voice going cold. "Clara has been nothing but good to him. Good to both of us." "I'm sure she has her virtues." Catherine's smile was thin. "But she's not family. Not really. And I wonder if Caleb might not be better off with someone who shares his mother's blood, someone who can tell him about Eliza, keep her memory alive." The implication hung heavy in the air. Clara felt her stomach clench, but she kept her expression neutral. Beside her, Caleb had gone very still. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Jake asked. "I'm suggesting that Caleb might benefit from living with me in St. Louis. My father has resources. Caleb could have tutors, proper schooling opportunities he'll never have on a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere." "This ranch isn't failing anymore," Clara said quietly. "And Caleb has a home here. With us. With his family." "With you, you mean? A woman who appeared out of nowhere and conveniently married a widower with land." Catherine's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Mo, I'm not saying you're a bad person, Mrs. Mercer, but surely you can see how this looks from the outside. How it might be in Caleb's best interest to be with his real family." Before anyone could respond, Caleb stood up. His small face was flushed, his hands clenched into fists. "She is my real family," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "Clara is my mama. Papa is my papa. This is my home." Catherine's expression softened. "Oh, sweetheart, I know this is confusing, but I'm your family too. Your mother's sister. Don't you want to know about her, about the woman who gave birth to you?" "I know about her." Caleb moved closer to Clara. "I have her picture. Mama put it in my room so I can see her every day. And she tells me stories about mothers and love and how people we lose are still with us." His voice grew stronger. "You're not taking me away. I'm staying here." He burst into tears and buried his face in Clara's skirt. She wrapped her arms around him, her own eyes stinging. "I think," Ruth said into the shocked silence, "that we should step outside. Catherine with me. Now." The two women left Catherine's face pale and tight. Through the window, Clara could see them in the yard, Ruth speaking with sharp, angry gestures, while Catherine stood with her arms crossed defensively. Jake moved to kneel beside Caleb, his hand on his son's back. "It's all right," he said gently. "Nobody's taking you anywhere. You're staying right here with us. I promise. On everything I am." "Promise." Caleb's voice was muffled against Clara's dress. "I promise." Caleb looked up at Clara, his face tear-streaked. "You won't let her take me?" Clara cupped his face with her hands. "Never. You're my son, Caleb. and I will fight anyone who tries to take you from this family." When Ruth and Catherine came back inside, Catherine's expression had shifted from entitled certainty to chastened uncertainty. "I apologize," she said stiffly. "Aunt Ruth has explained some things I didn't understand, about how you've cared for Caleb, Mrs. Mercer, about the circumstances of your marriage, and how the ranch has improved." "Thank you," Clara said carefully. "But I still," Catherine's voice wavered, "I still want to be part of his life. He's all I have left of my sister." "Surely you can understand that." Clara looked down at Caleb, who was watching Catherine with wary eyes. She thought about Eliza, about the woman in the photograph who'd never gotten to see her son grow, who'd never hear him speak or watch him run or know the remarkable person he was becoming. "I do understand," Clara said, "and I think Caleb should know his aunt should hear stories about his mother from someone who loved her. But that has to be his choice, and it has to happen here in his home, not by taking him away from everything he knows." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I just miss her so much. And when I look at him, I see her, and I thought if I could have him with me, it would hurt less." "It wouldn't," Ruth said gently. "You'd just be spreading the grief around. Caleb needs stability, not to be pulled between worlds." Catherine nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "You're right. I know you're right. She looked at Caleb. "Can I tell you about your mama just for a little while?" Caleb looked up at Clara questioningly. She gave him a small nod. "If you'd like to hear." "Okay," he said, "but Mama stays with me." "Of course." They sat in the kitchen while Catherine talked, her voice soft with memory. She told stories of Eliza as a girl, mischievous and kind, always rescuing stray animals and making up elaborate games. She described Eliza's laugh, her stubbornness, her dream of having a family and a home filled with love. Caleb listened intently, occasionally asking questions, and Clara saw him gathering these pieces of his mother, adding them to the picture frame in his room, building a more complete understanding of where he came from. When Catherine finally prepared to leave, she pulled Clara aside. "I was wrong about you," she said quietly. "Ruth told me how you came here, how you and Jake built this marriage from necessity into something real, how you've loved Caleb without trying to erase Eliza's memory." She paused. "That takes courage and grace. Eliza would have approved, I think." "I hope so. Take care of them, both of them." "I will. And maybe I can visit for his birthday, be part of his life without trying to take him." "We'd like that." After Catherine and Ruth left, the household seemed to exhale collectively. Caleb was exhausted from the emotional upheaval and went to bed early, clutching Cloud for comfort. Clara and Jake stood in his doorway watching him sleep. "That could have gone worse," Jake said. "Much worse, wow. It could have. But hearing Caleb defend you like that, seeing how fiercely he claimed you as his mother, that was something." Clara leaned against him. "He's a remarkable child. Ieto. He's your child, might not have come from your body, but he's yours in every way that counts." They returned to their room, and as they prepared for bed, Jake spoke again. "Clara, what you did today, giving Catherine a way to be involved without giving up what we've built, that was wise and kind. She's grieving. She just needed someone to help her see clearly." Jake pulled her close. "I love you." The words came out simply, without fanfare, but they settled into Clara's chest like warmth. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it scares me sometimes." "Why does it scare you, Olio?" "Because loving means risking loss, and I've lost before." "So have I, but I'm learning that the risk is worth it. That loving you, building this life with you, is worth whatever might come." They held each other in the darkness, and Clara felt the last of her walls crumbling. She'd built them carefully after Daniel died, protecting herself from more hurt. But Jake and Caleb had dismantled them brick by brick, not through force, but through patience and consistency and love that asked nothing except that she stay. "Jake, yeah, when did you become so wise?" "About the same time I married a woman who walks through blizzards and brings households back to life." She laughed, and they fell asleep, tangled together. The following morning brought unexpected news. Clara woke to find Jake already dressed, standing by the window with a strange expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up. "I've been thinking about what Catherine said yesterday, not the part about taking Caleb, but about us building a real family." He turned to face her. "I want to make it official. Legal. I want you to be a full partner in this ranch, not just in practice, but on paper. Equal ownership. Everything that's mine is yours. Clara's breath caught. Jake, you don't have to. I want to. You've put as much work into this place as I have. More in some ways. It should be yours too. Legally, officially, no question. When did you decide this? Been thinking about it for weeks. Yesterday just made it clear you're not going anywhere, and neither am I. This is our ranch, our life, our family. The papers should reflect that. They filed the documents the following week, and Clara Mercer became co-owner of the ranch that had become her home. It was a practical gesture, but it felt like something more, a final acknowledgement that they were truly equal partners in every sense. October brought the first hard frost, and with it a realization that made Clara both anxious and joyful. She'd missed her monthly courses, twice now. The familiar signs were unmistakable, the tender breasts, the slight nausea in the mornings, the bone-deep fatigue. She was pregnant. She told Jake one evening after Caleb was asleep, unable to keep the news to herself any longer. They were in their room getting ready for bed, and the words just spilled out. "I'm pregnant." Jake froze his shirt halfway unbuttoned. He stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, fear, and finally settling on cautious joy. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor's confirmation." "But yes, I'm sure." "How do you feel about it?" Clara heard the careful control in his voice, knew he was thinking about Eliza, about the birth that had taken her life. "Scared," she admitted, "but happy too. We're building a family, Jake. A real one. This feels like part of that." "I'm scared too." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "After what happened to Eliza, the thought of you going through that, I know, but I'm strong and I have good care available. We'll be careful." "We'll be more than careful." His hands moved to cup her face. "Are you happy about this?" "Yes." "Are you?" "Yes." His voice was thick with emotion. "Yeah, I'm happy. Another child. Our child." He pulled her into his arms and they stood there holding each other, wrapped in hope and fear in equal measure. They told Caleb the next morning, watching nervously for his reaction. He thought about it seriously, his young face solemn. "Will the baby be my real brother or sister?" he asked finally. "Real in every way," Clara assured him. "You'll be connected by love and by this family, just like you and I are." "Good," Caleb nodded decisively. "I'll teach them about horses and cats and how to draw, and I'll make sure nobody's mean to them." "That's a good plan," Jake said, ruffling his hair. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Clara continued her work as long as she could, attended by the same women she'd helped birth their own children. There was symmetry in that, a completion of some unspoken circle. Ruth visited frequently, bringing practical gifts and staying to help with heavier work. Catherine wrote monthly letters, long and detailed, full of memories and questions about Caleb's development. Clara responded faithfully, including small drawings Caleb made describing his progress and personality. A relationship was forming built on respect and shared love for a child rather than possession or rivalry. In March, on a day when the prairie was caught between winter and spring, Clara's labor began. Ruth attended her along with the town doctor and Mrs. Porter. Jake paced downstairs with Caleb, both of them anxious and helpless. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when Clara finally held her daughter, small and red-faced and furiously alive, she wept with relief and joy. "She's perfect," Ruth declared, examining the baby. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs that work just fine." Jake came upstairs when summoned Caleb close behind. When he saw Clara and their daughter, his face crumpled with emotion he didn't try to hide. "You did it," he said, his voice breaking. "You're both all right." "We're both fine." Clara smiled exhaustedly. "Want to meet your daughter?" He took the baby with trembling hands, staring down at her with wonder. Caleb climbed onto the bed beside Clara, peering at his new sister with intense interest. "She's really small," he observed. "You were that small once." "Was I this loud?" "Louder," Jake said, making them all laugh. They named her Sarah Hope Mercer, Sarah for Caleb's first mother, hope for the future they'd built together. When Ruth came back upstairs after giving them privacy, she found the family together, Clara exhausted but glowing. Jake holding Sarah Hope while Caleb chattered about all the things he'd teach his sister, the baby wailing in indignation at being thrust into the cold world. "Eliza would have loved this," Ruth said softly. Loved seeing Caleb so happy. Loved knowing Jake found love again. Loved that her memory is being honored while you build something new. Clara reached out, squeezing Ruth's hand. Thank you for accepting me, for helping us. Thank you for being exactly what this family needed. Spring came in full force that year, as if celebrating the new life that had entered the Mercer household. The days lengthened, the prairie turned green, and the ranch flourished in ways Jake had once thought impossible. Caleb took his role as big brother, seriously helping fetch things for Clara when Sarah Hope cried, singing to her in his clear young voice, showing her his drawings, even though she was too young to understand. He'd stand by her cradle for long stretches, just watching her, sleep protective and devoted. The ranch continued to thrive. Jake hired 2 seasonal workers to help with the heavy work, allowing him more time with his family. The repairs he'd been putting off for years were finally completed. The barn roof was fixed, the fences mended properly, new livestock purchased. Clara's midwifery practice flourished too. She became the unofficial midwife of salvation, and the surrounding areas trusted and well paid. Women sought her out not just for her skill, but for her kindness, her calm presence in their most vulnerable moments. Mrs. Porter became a friend as well as an employer. The sharp-edged businesswoman softened in Clara's company, and they spent long hours together, Clara sewing or doing bookkeeping, while Mrs. Porter minded the store talking about everything and nothing. The community that had once viewed Clara with suspicion now embraced her fully. She was Mrs. Mercer, the midwife who'd helped birth half the babies in the county, the woman who'd brought the Mercer Ranch back from the edge of failure, the mother who'd loved a silent child back to speech. Catherine visited twice a year, always welcomed, always grateful. She brought gifts from St. Louis, told stories about Eliza, and played with both children. But she always left knowing they belonged here with Clara and Jake in the home they'd built together. On a warm evening in late May, just over a year since Clara had knocked on Jake Mercer's door, the family gathered on the porch. Caleb was showing Sarah Hope, now 3 months old, and fascinated by everything a ladybug, he had found his voice patient as he explained its spots. Jake sat beside Clara, his arm around her shoulders, watching their children together. You know what today is? He asked quietly. What? Anniversary of when you knocked on my door, 1 year ago tonight. Clara thought back to that frozen, desperate woman who'd had nothing left but the will to keep moving. She thought about the harsh man who'd offered not kindness, but brutal honesty, a bargain instead of charity. We were different people then, she said. We were, colder, more broken. And now, Jake pulled her closer. Now we're whole, or whole enough anyway. He looked at their children at the ranch stretching out around them, at the life they'd built from nothing. You asked me once what we were building. I think I finally know the answer. What's that? Everything. We're building everything that matters. Caleb was trying to get Sarah Hope to touch the ladybug, his laughter ringing clear across the yard. The baby watched with wide eyes, not understanding, but delighted by her brother's enthusiasm. This was what redemption looked like, Clara realized. Not dramatic or instantaneous, but slow and steady, built through choice and work and love, given freely. They hadn't rescued each other that frozen February night. They'd given each other a chance, and then they'd both fought like hell to make something real from that opportunity. The ranch wasn't failing anymore. The silence had been broken. The grief had been honored and allowed to transform into something gentler. And 3 lost souls, soon to be 4, counting Sarah Hope, had found their way home to each other. Not through destiny or romance or any grand design, but through stubbornness and partnership and the daily decision to choose love over loneliness, hope over despair, building over breaking. As the stars emerged one by one above the prairie, Clara thought about the last door she'd knocked on that terrible night, certain it would either save her or be the place she finally gave up. Instead, it had been both and neither. It had been a beginning, nothing more. What came after all the tedium and struggle and transformation that had been up to them to create? And they had created something beautiful. Mama, Caleb called, can we stay out here and watch the stars for a little while? Of course, Clara answered. Jake retrieved blankets, and they settled on the porch together. Caleb between his parents, Sarah Hope drowsing in Clara's arms, Cloud the cat appearing to curl up at Caleb's feet. The spring night was perfect, warm and gentle, full of possibility. Tell me a story, Caleb requested, his voice already sleepy. A true one, about how our family started. Clara looked at Jake, who nodded. So she told the story, editing it for a child's ears, but keeping the essential truth. She told him about a woman who walked through a blizzard, about a man who opened his door to a stranger, about a bargain that became a partnership that became love. She told him about kittens and courage, about choosing each other every single day. And they lived happily ever after, Caleb asked when she finished. They lived, Clara corrected gently. Not always happily, because life isn't like that, but together, which was better than happy. Together meant you could face anything, Jake added. I like that better, Caleb decided, because happy is boring, but together is forever. Out of the mouths of children, Clara thought, smiling. Jake's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together with the ease of long practice. They sat together on that porch until the children fell asleep and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Then Jake carried Caleb to bed while Clara settled Sarah Hope in her cradle, and they met in their own room, their own bed, ready to face whatever came next. Together. Always together. And in the morning, when Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the window and Jake's arm around her waist and the sound of Caleb singing downstairs, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Not because fate had decreed it, but because she'd chosen it and kept choosing it every single day. The last door in the cold had opened into warmth, and the woman who'd knocked desperate and frozen and alone had found not just shelter, but home. Not just survival, but love. Not just an ending, but a beginning that would last the rest of her life. Thank you so much for staying with Clara, Jake, and Tommy until the very end. Their journey reminds us that sometimes the coldest beginnings lead to the warmest endings, and that love doesn't replace love, it multiplies it. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear about second chances. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next heartfelt tale. What moment touched you most? Was it Tommy's first words, Eliza's letter, or Clara's bravery during the birth? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. Until next time, remember, every ending is just a new beginning waiting to unfold.